The awakening of the seed. The icy winds of Xyn'Zar 3 howled across the barren tundra, whipping up crystalline shards of frost that sparkled under the pale light of twin suns. The research outpost stood alone against the hostile environment, its domed shelters glowing faintly with artificial warmth. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation as Dr. Sienna Ralston examined the object in her hands, a seed unlike any she had ever encountered. "It was buried under 6 meters of permafrost," said Jonas Ward, the outpost's lead excavator. He leaned against a console, his rugged face lined with exhaustion. The scanners nearly missed it. "If it wasn't for the heat signature, we'd have passed it by." Sienna turned the seed over carefully, the frost melting beneath her gloved fingers. It was metallic and smooth, yet its surface pulsed faintly with an organic warmth. Strange grooves spiraled across its surface, glowing softly with an iridescent green light. "This isn't a normal seed," Sienna murmured, her voice filled with awe. "It's something engineered, but by who? And why bury it so deep?" "It's probably dormant," said Maralai, the team's biologist, peering over Sienna's shoulder. "Maybe a relic of some ancient civilization. It could hold clues to how life adapted to this frozen wasteland." "We should study it carefully," Sienna said, placing the seed into a containment unit. "No experiments until we understand its properties." Jonas crossed his arms, his brow furrowing. "You're not planning on planting it, are you?" "Not yet," Sienna replied, though her curiosity was already tugging at her restraint. "We don't know what it might do." 2 nights later, the outpost's quiet routine was shattered. Sienna was in her lab, poring over the seed's molecular scans. The data was baffling. Its structure was both organic and mechanical, a perfect fusion of biology and technology. But what caught her attention most was its core, a dense cluster of unknown energy that seemed to pulse in response to her presence. A sudden alarm broke her focus. The lights in the lab flickered, and a deep, vibrating hum resonated through the outpost. "Sienna," Jonas's voice crackled over the intercom. "Something's happening in the greenhouse. You'd better get down here." Sienna rushed through the corridors, her heart pounding. When she entered the greenhouse, she froze in shock. The containment unit was shattered, and the seed was gone. In its place, a tendril of glowing metallic roots twisted upward from the soil, its spiraling grooves eerily similar to the seed's surface. Mara stood nearby, her face pale. "It wasn't me," she said quickly. "I swear, I didn't touch it. It just grew." The roots pulsed faintly, and a faint green mist drifted from the tendril's apex. The air in the greenhouse felt heavier, charged with static electricity. "What the hell is this thing?" Jonas muttered, his hand hovering over the knife at his belt. Sienna stepped closer, her curiosity outweighing her fear. "It's alive," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and it's growing faster than anything I've ever seen." As she spoke, the tendril shuddered and began to branch out, its roots burrowing deeper into the soil while metallic vines snaked along the greenhouse walls. The mist thickened, and the lights flickered again. "We need to shut this down," Jonas said, his voice firm, "before it gets out of control." Sienna hesitated, her eyes locked on the pulsating growth. "No, we need to understand it first. This could be the discovery of a lifetime." Jonas cursed under his breath. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't natural. It doesn't belong here." Before either of them could act, the tendril emitted a piercing, otherworldly sound, a harmonic resonance that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. The mist grew thicker, and the vines moved faster, creeping toward the outpost's structural supports. "Whatever it is," Mara said, her voice trembling, "it's waking up." The hum grew louder, reverberating through the outpost as if the very structure were alive. The metallic tendrils expanded rapidly, branching out with unnatural precision. They pierced through walls, snaking into the corridors, and leaving glowing green trails in their wake. Sienna, Jonas and Mara retreated from the greenhouse as the vines closed in, sealing off the entrance behind them. The three stood in the hallway, the faint mist lingering in the air, carrying a metallic tang that burned their throats. "We need to isolate this thing," Jonas said, his voice sharp with urgency. "Seal the greenhouse and vent the atmosphere. It's the only way to stop it." Sienna shook her head. "We can't just kill it. This could be the most significant discovery in centuries. We need to understand it." "Understand it?" Jonas snapped, gesturing toward the sealed door. "That thing's already tearing through our outpost. How much more do you want to understand before it kills us?" Mara stepped between them, her voice trembling. "Listen, we don't even know what it's capable of. If we're going to stop it or study it, we need to figure out what triggered its growth." "The containment unit," Sienna said, her eyes narrowing. "It must have been the conditions in the greenhouse. The combination of warmth, moisture, and nutrient-rich soil." Jonas cut her off. "Whatever caused it, we don't have time to argue. If we don't act now, it'll take over the entire outpost." The team made their way to the control center, their movements quick but cautious. The tendrils had spread farther than they'd anticipated, creeping along the ceilings and walls like a biomechanical web. The glowing grooves pulsed faintly, casting eerie patterns of light across the corridors. As they entered the control room, Mara gasped. The vines had already infiltrated the systems. Panels flickered erratically, and the screens displayed incomprehensible symbols that shifted and writhed like living things. "It's interfacing with the outpost," Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's learning." Jonas grabbed a crowbar from a nearby toolkit and began prying vines away from the main console. The tendrils resisted, tightening around the equipment with surprising strength. "Sienna," he barked, "can you override the greenhouse systems from here?" Sienna's fingers flew over the console, her eyes scanning the damaged interface. "The systems are partially corrupted, but I think I can." A sharp, high-pitched tone erupted from the speakers, cutting her off. The tone grew louder, evolving into a distorted voice that echoed through the room. "We are awaken." The lights flickered violently, and the tendrils lashed out, striking Jonas and throwing him against the wall. He groaned, clutching his side as blood trickled from his temple. "Jonas!" Mara screamed, rushing to his side. Sienna froze, her breath catching in her throat. The voice continued, its cadence alien yet disturbingly deliberate. "The seed returns. The cycle begins." "What cycle?" Sienna whispered, her mind racing. "What are you?" The tendrils writhed, pulling away from the console and retreating toward the greenhouse. The glow intensified, and the hum transformed into a low rhythmic pulse that resonated through the floor. Sienna helped Jonas to his feet. "We need to find the central root," she said, her voice resolute. "The source of all this. If we can destroy it." "Destroy it?" Mara interrupted, her eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear what it said? It's not just a plant, it's intelligent. It knows we're here." "That's exactly why we have to act now," Sienna said, her tone sharp. "If this thing spreads beyond the outpost, it could destroy everything." Reluctantly, Mara nodded, and the three of them made their way back toward the greenhouse. The corridors were darker now, the glowing tendrils casting long, shifting shadows. The hum grew louder, and the air grew thicker with the green mist. When they reached the greenhouse, the sight before them was overwhelming. The central tendril had grown into a massive structure, its spiraling roots extending through the ceiling and walls. The mist swirled around it, and smaller tendrils writhed like living snakes. Jonas raised his weapon, his face grim. "Whatever this thing is, it's not stopping on its own." Sienna stepped forward, her eyes locked on the glowing grooves of the central root. The patterns shifted, forming symbols that seemed almost familiar, like an ancient language just beyond comprehension. The distorted voice returned, echoing through the chamber. "The seed consumes. adapts. Balance. Must return. The tendrils lashed out, forcing the team to scatter. Jonas fired his weapon, the bursts of energy tearing through smaller roots, but barely scratching the central structure. Mara activated an incendiary device, hurling it toward the core. The explosion sent shockwaves through the chamber, but the core remained intact. "It's too strong," Mara shouted, her voice panicked. Sienna's mind raced as she dodged another lashing tendril. Her eyes fell on a damaged power conduit sparking near the base of the structure. An idea began to form. "The energy," she yelled. "It's drawing power from the outpost. If we overload the main grid, we might be able to destroy it. Or take the whole outpost with us." Jonas shot back, firing another round at an approaching tendril. "Do you have a better idea?" Sienna retorted. Jonas hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, do it." Sienna sprinted toward the conduit, dodging tendrils as they lashed out. The hum grew deafening, and the mist thickened, making it hard to breathe. Reaching the conduit, she tore away the vines and began rerouting the power systems. "Whatever you're doing, do it fast," Mara yelled, fending off another wave of tendrils. Sparks flew as Sienna worked, the controls overheating under the strain. "Almost there," she shouted. The distorted voice returned, louder and more menacing than before. "You cannot stop the cycle." With a final burst of energy, Sienna completed the override. The lights in the greenhouse surged, and the central roots screamed. A high-pitched, otherworldly sound that shook the entire outpost. The tendrils convulsed violently, and the glowing grooves dimmed. "Get out!" Sienna screamed as the structure began to collapse. The team bolted for the exit, barely making it out as the greenhouse erupted in a blinding explosion of light and energy. The shockwave knocked them off their feet. And then silence. Silence enveloped the outpost, broken only by the faint hum of sparking wires and the distant howl of the frozen winds outside. Sienna, Jonas, and Mara lay sprawled in the corridor, their suits battered and their breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. The greenhouse was gone, its remains a blackened husk filled with flickering embers and curling smoke. Sienna struggled to her feet, her legs trembling as she surveyed the damage. The central root was gone, obliterated by the overload. Yet, as she looked closer, her stomach sank. The smaller tendrils hadn't fully died. They twitched and writhed, weak but still alive, their glowing grooves dimly pulsating. "It's not over," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Jonas pushed himself up, wincing as he clutched his side. "What do you mean it's not over? We blew the damn thing to pieces." Mara staggered upright, her eyes fixed on the faintly glowing vines. "She's right. It's still alive. It's regenerating." Sienna knelt beside one of the twitching roots, her gloved hand brushing against its surface. The grooves pulsed faintly, and for a split second, she felt something, a presence. It was faint, like a distant echo, but it was there. "It's connected to something deeper," she said, her voice steady despite the chill crawling up her spine. "The core we destroyed was just a node. The true root system must be buried beneath the outpost." Jonas groaned. "You're saying there's more of this thing? Underground?" Sienna nodded. "We've only seen the surface. Whatever planted this seed wanted it to spread, to take over entire ecosystems. It's still trying." Mara's face paled. "If it keeps spreading, it won't stop here. It'll consume everything." Sienna stood, her resolve hardening. "Then we stop it. For good." The team made their way to the subterranean access shaft, the hum of the vines growing louder with each step. The air felt heavier, charged with the same energy that had filled the greenhouse. The walls were riddled with glowing roots, their grooves pulsating in eerie synchronization. "Are we sure about this?" Jonas asked, his grip tightening on his rifle. "We don't even know what we're walking into." "We know enough," Sienna replied. "This thing isn't just growing, it's evolving. If we don't destroy it now, we might not get another chance. They descended into the depths, the shaft creaking under their weight. The deeper they went, the brighter the glow became, until the walls themselves seemed to radiate an unnatural light. The hum grew into a low rhythmic vibration that reverberated through their bones. The shaft opened into a massive cavern, its walls glistening with a strange, liquid-like sheen. At the center stood the true core, a gargantuan root system that pulsed with life. Metallic tendrils spiraled upward, their grooves forming intricate patterns that shifted and flowed like a living language. The distorted voice returned, louder and more menacing than ever. You cannot resist. The seed will flourish. Balance must return. The central core emitted a powerful pulse, and the air around it thickened with green mist. Smaller tendrils shot out from the walls, lashing toward the team. Spread out, Xyn'Zar shouted, firing her rifle at the approaching vines. Her shots tore through the smaller roots, but the central core remained unaffected, its pulsations growing more erratic. Mera threw an incendiary grenade, the explosion sending a wave of fire across the cavern. The flames scorched the surrounding tendrils, but the core absorbed the heat, its glow intensifying. It's feeding off our attacks, Mera yelled. We're just making it stronger. Xyn'Zar's mind raced as she dodged a tendril. Her eyes darted to the base of the core, where the grooves converged into a swirling nexus of energy. An idea formed, a desperate, dangerous plan. We need to hit the nexus, she said, her voice resolute. If we overload it with enough energy, it'll collapse the entire root system. Jonas grimaced. You mean take the whole cavern down? That'll bury us alive. Do you have a better idea? Xyn'Zar snapped. Jonas hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but if we're doing this, we better do it fast. While Jonas and Mera fended off the tendrils, Xyn'Zar worked frantically to rig an improvised energy overload. She connected the remaining power cells to a detonation device, her hands trembling as the core emitted another powerful pulse. The cavern trembled, chunks of rock falling from the ceiling. Almost there, she shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. The voice grew louder, its tone more desperate now. You cannot destroy. The cycle cannot end. Xyn'Zar ignored it, her focus unyielding. With a final twist, she armed the device and turned to her team. It's ready. Get to the shaft. Jonas and Mera retreated, their weapons blazing as they cleared a path. Xyn'Zar followed, clutching the detonator tightly. The moment they reached the shaft, she turned and pressed the trigger. The cavern erupted in a blinding explosion of light and sound. The core screamed, a deafening, inhuman wail that echoed through the depths. The ground shook violently, and the walls began to collapse, massive chunks of rock crashing down. Go, 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 Jonas yelled, pulling Xyn'Zar into the shaft as the cavern caved in behind them. The team emerged onto the frozen surface, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Behind them, the outpost trembled, its domes cracking under the strain of the explosion. Moments later, the ground buckled, and the entire structure collapsed into the icy depths. Xyn'Zar stared at the ruins, her chest heavy with exhaustion. It's over, she said quietly. We stopped it. Jonas leaned against a snowdrift, his face pale. For now. But if that seed was planted here, who's to say there aren't more of them out there? Mera shivered, pulling her coat tighter. If there are, we'll be ready. As the team boarded their shuttle, the faint hum of the seed lingered in their minds, a haunting reminder of what they had unleashed, and the secrets still buried beneath the ice.